All right, let's get going on today's meeting. So today is actually a pretty momentous occasion in this course because today we are going to wrap up our look at one-way ANOVA, which means that we are going to wrap up our look at the final test of significance that we're going to cover in this intro course. So once we finish today, you will be able to do about, I would say, 70% of the tests that you need to do in psychology, and you will be well on your way to being able to understand 100% of the statistics that you read in psychology. Maybe not able to do them quite yet, but definitely know the premise and the logic of that significance test and what it all means. So all that and more today as we wrap up our look at one-way ANOVA. So if you remember 2 meetings ago, we took a look at why we need one-way ANOVAs, why we just can't rely on t-tests to do multiple comparisons. And then last time, we showed how you had to do one-way ANOVAs in SPSS, but we left it a little incomplete because while we were able to detect that there was a difference between the populations, we weren't able to hone in on which populations differed from each other. And that is what we're going to fix today with SPSS and one-way ANOVA, now with follow-up analysis, so that you can complete the story, get the entire picture, and make that contribution to psychology based on your data. So this is also going to be another day when we take a look at how to do this in SPSS, because ANOVAs mathematically require so many steps to do that it is way better to hand those off to the computers, let them do what they're best at doing, and then we can focus on interpretation, which is, again, that final piece that we want in order to be able to do inferential statistics, in order to be able to take our results from, in our example we're going to take a look at today, 181 people, and then intelligently be able to make an impact on the entire population of individuals, not just those 181. So we're going to continue with our look at inferential statistics. We are going to be doing the Do It With Me demo and show you exactly how to do a follow-up analysis in SPSS on a one-way ANOVA. So the plan for today, we're going to take another look and another Do It With Me demo at the Aknin et al. Study, Making a Difference Matters, Impact Unlocks the Emotional Benefits of Prosocial Spending. This is the same study that we began our look at last time, but now we're going to extend our analysis with some follow-up analysis. These are also known as post-hoc tests. Post-hoc for the Latin after the fact. So if you want to impress the statistician, you will get a microcosm of increased respect if you say, hey, what about those post-hoc tests? But that's what they're called in very many other places. So just so that you don't get confused, if you go on beyond this course, look up some statistics, and they're talking about post-hoc tests, all they're talking about is follow-up analysis for an ANOVA. And we're going to take a look at a few of these follow-up analysis tests. We're going to mention their popularity, specifically as it pertains to psychology. So some of these follow-up tests, when you're reading research in psychology, you're going to come across them again and again and again and again. Other ones, you're going to come across them once in a blue moon. So we'll mention those so you know which ones to look out for. And then we'll also mention why there are so many of these follow-up analyses. And it's because they have different strengths and weaknesses. So depending upon what you need to protect versus how daring you can be, you can choose the follow-up analysis that is appropriate for your particular research project. And then on that note, we're also going to have a bit of a look at whether Aknin et al. Actually used an appropriate follow-up analysis when they did their particular study, specifically this one here. Making a Difference Matters, Impact Unlocks the Emotional Benefits of Pro-Social Spending. So we're going to do a very quick recap on exactly what this study was all about. Then we're going to jump into our SPSS analysis. So quick recap, let's start it off. So what Aknin et al. Wanted to take a look at is what is the benefit to the giver when you're giving a gift. So we all know that phrase, "'tis better to give than to receive." And Aknin et al. Actually wanted to test that. Is it better, or "'tis it better to give than to receive?" So what they did is they phoned up 181 subjects. And these 181 subjects, they were split randomly into 3 different groups. So you had 3 different sets of subjects, 3 different samples. Each one is tested once. That's an independent means sample design. If we were doing a t-test, we would be doing an independent samples t-test. We have 3 conditions, so we can't do an independent samples t-test. We need to do an ANOVA, so we're going to do an independent samples ANOVA, also known as a one-way ANOVA. So 60 of the participants randomly were assigned to the Prosocial Boost sample. And in the Prosocial Boost sample, they were asked to recall a time that they spent money on someone else, and spending that money had a meaningful positive impact on that person. So in the study, they asked you to think about a time where you spent around $20 on somebody else, and that gift had a meaningful impact on the person that you gave it to. So that was condition number 1, the Prosocial Boost condition. Another 60 individuals were in the Prosocial Blocked condition. And in this case, they were asked to recall a time that you spent approximately $20 on somebody else. So it's prosocial spending, but the spending did not have a meaningful impact. So in this case, you gave the gift, but the gift really wasn't meaningful. The person didn't really help the person out. So this is the Prosocial Blocked condition. And then the final 61 participants, they were asked to recall a time that you spent money on yourself. So this was the personal condition. And they were simply asked to recall a time that you spent $20 and that spending was on yourself. So what they wanted to investigate was, what was the effect of these 3 different types of conditions on subjective well-being? What was the effect of these 3 different types of conditions on the happiness of the person that was actually giving the gift? So they had the manipulation, recall a time when you gave a gift and it was meaningful, Prosocial Boost, you gave a gift and it was not meaningful, Prosocial Blocked, or you just bought yourself a little something personal. And then they followed this recollection up with a questionnaire. They actually did 2 questionnaires, and participants reported their subjective well-being on a cognitive and affective measure, current positive affect, so how they were feeling right then when they recalled the memory, was reported on the positive and negative affect schedule, which included the word happy. So this is a scale that is scored from 1 very slightly or not at all, for example, happy, to 5, extremely happy. And then overall cognitive evaluation of life on the satisfaction with life scale. And again, this is one that has a number of different items, and it varies anywhere between 1, you strongly agree, to 7, 1, you strongly disagree, to 7, you agree. And then what they did in their analysis was they found that these 2 scores were very highly correlated with each other. So they basically measured the same thing. So they created a single subjective well-being score from combining the scores of these 2 measures into just one combined measure. And that's what we're going to take a look at, the subjective well-being scores for each participant. So again, the question that they were asking, we have a Prosocial Boost, $20 gift, and it had a meaningful impact. We had people in the Prosocial Blocked, $20 gift, but no meaningful impact. And then we had people in the personal condition, $20, and you spent it on yourself. And the question was, is there a difference in the measured happiness of these individuals who did the Prosocial Boost giving, these individuals who did the Prosocial Blocked giving, or these individuals who just bought themselves a little something? All right, so the null hypothesis for this study is that there is no difference between the population of individuals that gave a meaningful gift, the happiness of the population of individuals that gave a meaningful gift, the happiness of the population of individuals that gave the non-meaningful gift, or the happiness of the population of individuals that just bought themselves a little something. So the null hypothesis is that the mean happiness of the Prosocial Boost population equals the mean happiness of the Prosocial Blocked population equals the mean happiness of the personal population. The alternative hypothesis for an ANOVA has to cover every other situation other than the one that's covered in the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis says that all of the populations are equal. The alternative hypothesis has to cover every other possibility in terms of what might happen. And the way that you can express that most easily is through an English sentence, and you say, alternative hypothesis, at least one mean is different. So null hypothesis, all three means are the same. And if we had more conditions, it would be all four means or all five means or all six means. You can extend the ANOVA to as many conditions as you want. But in this case, we have three. So all three means are the same. Alternative hypothesis is at least one mean is different. And it's written this way because if we were to write it out mathematically, we would need to write something like this. Alternative hypothesis is that the average happiness of the prosocial boost condition does not equal the average happiness of the prosocial block condition, does not equal the average happiness of the personal condition. All population means are different. That's only one possibility. It's also possible that the mean happiness of the prosocial boost population does not equal the mean happiness of the prosocial blocked population, and the mean happiness of the prosocial boost population does not equal the mean happiness of the personal population, and the mean happiness of the prosocial blocked situation does equal the mean happiness of the personal population. That's another possibility. There's a third one. The mean, I'm not even going to read through it. It's a lot. And that's not even all of them. It just keeps going and going and going. And if you were to write this out, every single combination, just for three different conditions, it gets very, very long. And imagine if you had 4 or 5 or 6 conditions. Imagine if you were doing a study where you were taking a look at performance across grades and you went all the way from kindergarten to university. You would have a novel of your alternative hypothesis, or you can just write at least one mean is different. And we understand that that means that any of those combinations could be covered or are covered by that alternative hypothesis. All right, so that's where we left off last time. We ran the statistics, we did the ANOVA, and we did find, spoiler alert, if you, I guess if you forgot, memory spoiler alert, that the alternative hypothesis was supported. We found evidence for the alternative hypothesis, we rejected the null hypothesis, we accept the alternative hypothesis, and at least one mean is different. But then the question is, which one of these conditions is it? Because we need to know what the story is. It's not just enough to say, hey, we found something. We need to know what is it that we found. And that is where follow-up analyses come in. So again, a follow-up analysis, more commonly known as a post-hoc analysis. Your textbook uses follow-up, but I guarantee you in at least 80% of the times where you encounter this, it's going to call them post-hoc analyses. But this is what allows multiple comparisons to be made. So if you recall, when we were talking about the need for ANOVA, we were told, hey, multiple comparisons are bad. Multiple comparisons are things that we need to be very, very cautious with, that we can't actually do multiple t-tests. Post-hoc analyses or follow-up analyses, they allow multiple comparisons to be made while using strategies to control, and I have control-ish, and we'll talk about why, but controlling those type 1 error rates. So controlling the error of saying you found something when there actually isn't an effect to be found. Saying that you found something when the null hypothesis is true. Saying that populations are different when in fact populations are the same. That's what a type 1 error is. And these follow-up analyses, they control for that type 1 error rate even when you're doing multiple comparisons. So you can do multiple comparisons without that type 1 error rate, without that real alpha going up into the 10%, 30%, 40% example that we saw in a previous class. However, follow-up analyses are only appropriate when the results of the ANOVA test are significant. So the ANOVA test, I'll put that in bold, it's very, very important. The ANOVA test is the gatekeeper against just doing multiple comparisons. The ANOVA test is the one that truly controls for that type 1 error rate. and allows you to confidently say, hey, I have an alpha level of 5%, and I know for a fact that my test did not violate that alpha level. My test did not inflate any sort of type 1 error rate when you do the ANOVA. So the ANOVA is what guarantees that you did a fair comparison when you're looking at multiple conditions. But once you know that there is a difference there, once you know that there is a difference somewhere in your different populations, then you can use these follow-up analysis tools in order to figure out where that difference is. So we kind of use the metaphor for inferential statistics that it's kind of like a detective trying to solve a crime. It's kind of like a detective taking in clues and trying to come up with the big picture of what is going on. And an ANOVA is like, again, that gatekeeping test that keeps you from just trying to make connections where connections might not actually be. So imagine a scenario where you have a detective, and this detective has been collecting evidence, and this detective has been interviewing people and making connections and collecting fingerprints and printing out maps and making graphs. And then he calls in his partner and he shows him the board and he starts explaining what he's been doing. And his partner says to him, well, this is excellent work, but I'm a little confused. What crime has been committed? And the first partner says, crime? Oh, there's no crime. But the board is pretty cool, isn't it? That's what it's like to do a follow-up analysis before getting a significant test on the ANOVA. The ANOVA is the commission of the crime. The ANOVA is when something actually happened, then you do the follow-up analyses in order to figure out what happened. So I mention this because I have not met a single person who has not run an ANOVA on data that they've collected, on a project that they've been working on, and did not get a significant result with that ANOVA and was not tempted to look at the follow-up analysis. Okay, so just be aware. You can look at the follow-up analysis. That's totally fine. You can kind of try to get an idea of where your research might be going, but you cannot interpret these follow-up analyses. You're not allowed to do it when your ANOVA is not significant. Because when the ANOVA is not significant, that means that there are no difference between the populations and you don't actually have to do follow-up analyses. But when you do find that at least one of those populations are different, then you do the follow-up analysis and it'll let you know which of those populations is different from which other population. All right, so is the logic and criteria for using a follow-up analysis clear? All right. So now we are going to take a look at the popularity of follow-up analyses in psychology. And I just love the idea that these guys are celebrating like Bonferroni being like #1. It's like, yeah, man, Bonferroni post-hoc analysis, #1, baby. It's actually not, it's #2, but don't tell them. So follow-up analysis popularity in psychology. We're going to do this. It's a little bit beyond what you get in your textbook. But I wanted to do this because most of the tools that you're learning here, you're going to apply to understanding research. We go through how to do it because that's one of the best ways to understand what it is. But in reality, 90% of what you use your statistics knowledge for is going to be reading other research rather than doing your own research. And that's true for myself as well. I do one article, I'll publish one piece of research after I read like 50. Right? So you have to know how to understand the psychology. So we're going to give you a little bit more in-depth on terms of the follow-up analyses that you'll come across. And we're going to start with Tukey, honestly significant difference. So this one is the most widely used in experimental and cognitive psychology. So if you pick up a random psychology paper and they have post-hoc analyses or follow-up analyses, most likely you're going to run into the Tukey's honestly significant difference. The next one is Bonferroni, which is my favorite named follow-up analysis. I think it's the San Francisco treat, but anyways, this is the most widely used in applied clinical and social psychology. The one that your textbook mentions and the one that we're going to focus in on today is Fisher's least significant difference follow-up analysis. And this one is still common, but mostly in simple three-group designs. So in designs like the one that we're looking at today, where there's three conditions, you'll see Fisher's least significant difference used very commonly. However, once it gets to 4, 5, 6 conditions, this one becomes less used, less common. There's also the SIDAK. This one is actually more powerful than Bonferroni. It's a later developed follow-up analysis. We have the Games-Howell. This is the standard kind of go-to follow-up analysis when your variances are unequal. So all of these analyses have different assumptions that your data needs to meet in order for them to be used correctly. Games-Howell is very good when your variances are unequal. And then we have the Scheffé follow-up analysis. And this one is used mainly for complex follow-up analyses. So this is not even grad school statistics. It's more like post-doc statistics that you'll pick up is what Scheffé is. But you will come across it. You won't know how to do it, but you'll know how to interpret it. So we have 6, and I picked these 6 because these are the most popular ones that are available in SPSS. And there's 6 of them. They exist for a reason. So what are the reasons for it? Well, the reason is because they got different strengths and weaknesses. So we'll start off with the Fisher's least significant difference. This one is actually the most powerful of the follow-up analyses. However, it's also the most liberal of the follow-up analyses. So what does that mean? Well, most powerful means that Fisher's least significant difference is the most able to detect a difference between two populations when a difference exists. So if you're testing two populations, the difference between two populations in your follow-up analysis, Fisher's least significant difference is the most likely one to detect if that difference exists. So it's very powerful. However, it's also the most liberal. It's the most likely to make a type 1 error. It's the most likely to say that a difference exists when a difference doesn't actually exist. So the kind of thinking that you would go through if you were going to use Fisher's is first you would say, hey, does the situation match up with Fisher's least significant difference? Are there 3 conditions, maybe 4, but that's kind of pushing it? If it is, do I want to detect differences more than protect against saying that something is there when it's not there? So if you're doing sort of exploratory research, then maybe you want to use Fisher's LSD because it's more likely to detect a difference if it's actually there. If you're doing something like medical research, and if you say a drug is effective when a drug actually isn't effective, that's going to be a big deal. You might want to stay away from Fisher's least significant difference test. So knowing the strengths and weaknesses of these different tests will allow you to choose which one is most appropriate for your particular project, and later on also, as we're going to see, allow you to critically think about when you're reading research, did they pick the right follow-up analysis? All right, next one, Bonferroni. Bonferroni is extremely safe, but it's very conservative. Extremely safe means that you're not going to make a lot of type 1 errors. It's very good at controlling type 1 errors. It's very good at controlling the error of saying that something is there when something really isn't there, saying there's a difference when there is no difference. However, it's very conservative. It will miss certain real differences that actually exist. So you get safer on the one side that you're not going to make a type 1 error, but you get conservative on the other side where you're not going to be able to pick up differences that actually exist. All right, we got SIDAK. SIDAK is a lot like Bonferroni, and the more comparisons there are, the more conditions there are, the more it becomes like the Bonferroni test. It's more powerful than the Bonferroni, but it has the same kind of issues, especially as your comparisons start to increase in number. Tukey, honestly, significant difference. You remember that this is the most popular in experimental and cognitive psychology. This is because Tukey's really balances caution and power. It is kind of the workhorse in terms of it's not too liberal, but it's not too conservative. It's powerful, but it's not reckless. It'll detect differences without really, causing a lot of type 1 error. So it controls both sides of the equation, power versus protecting against error, which is why it's one of the most popular ones. However, it does have a weakness. It is the best when all your sample sizes are equal. So the more closely they are in size, the more Tukey is going to be that great balance of caution and power. But things start to go a little weird when your sample sizes are very different. All right, next, the Games-Howell. This one is the best for unequal variances and unequal sample sizes. So if you have very large differences in your sample sizes, if you are comparing a typical population that you have thousands of individuals surveyed against a clinical population where you only have 30 individuals surveyed, you might want to use the Games-Howell. You'll need a third condition because it's for ANOVAs, but you might want to use the Games-Howell because it's best for those unequal sample sizes or unequal variances. And then finally, we got Scheffé, which is the most flexible, but it's also the most conservative. And again, it's mostly used for complex analyses that we are going to, well, we won't see together, but maybe one day you'll see in your psychological academic journal. All right, so those are the different types of tests. Just so when you come across them in your reading, you don't get too weirded out by, oh, what's a SIDAK, what's a Bonferroni? They're just all different types of follow-up tests. All right, so now we're going to go to SPSS. Now we're going to do the analysis and do the follow-up analyses. So go, if you haven't already, open up the one-way ANOVA SPSS demo. This is the same Excel sheet that we were using in our last meeting. And also make sure that you are signed in and ready to go on SPSS. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up the ANOVA just the way that we did it last time. We're going to do it the exact same way, except we're not going to run the test yet. So let's get that data in. So we have our condition here. This is the group that the subjects were placed into. So prosocial boost, prosocial blocked, or personal here. And then we have their social well-being scores. So the higher the social well-being score, the better they felt about giving their gift. And then importantly, we have this condit capital N condition. And remember that this is column. And this is the column that we need to numerically label our conditions. So SPSS requires us we actually don't even need to name the condition for SPSS, but we need to number the condition for SPSS in ANOVA. So I mention this again because using names for the conditions, completely fine for the t-test. But using names for the conditions somehow blows SPSS's mind when you put it into an ANOVA. So we need to number the conditions. So this separate column here, condit N, this is where we say, hey, prosocial boost, that's condition number 1. Prosocial blocked, that's condition number 2. And personal is condition number 3. So we're going to highlight all of these, Control-Shift, arrow keys, Control-C to copy. We're going to allow. And then we're going to go over here to IBM SPSS statistics. And let's see if we can, I'm going to do that thing. Yeah, let's put in that V first. We'll just delete that. And then we can paste the whole thing in there. Okay, so now we have our 3 columns of data. And we are going to go to variable view down here. And we're going to change this first variable to condition. If I can spell. Here we go. This second variable is going to be SWB for subjective well-being. And then this third variable is going to be condit, big N for condit N, number condit, whatever. That'll work. And you can see that we have our data labeled here. Do not forget to label your data because especially in an ANOVA, things start to get a little bit complicated. Okay, so now that we have the variables properly labeled, we're going to go back down here to variable view, and we're going to go to condit N, the one that is just numeric, and we are going to go here to values, and we're going to click these 3 little dots here, and we are going to name what each of these conditions is. And you're going to see why that is in just a moment. It's very, very important. So do not think for a second that your human mind is going to be great at remembering that prosocial boost is 1 and prosocial blocked is 2, and personal is 3. When you start trying to interpret the output, the more you can offload your working memory, the more accurate your interpretation is going to be. So we are going to hit plus here, and we're going to let SPSS know that the value number 1, the 1 condition, that is prosocial boost. And then we're going to add another one by hitting the plus, and we're going to let SPSS know that, hey, condition number 2, that is prosocial blocked. And then we are going to do the third one here, and we're going to tell SPSS, hey, you know that third condition, that is personal, in the sense that it's the condition where you gave yourself a personal gift. All right, and then we can hit OK. And now we have these values in here, and what that's going to do is, instead of in our output, SPSS reporting condition 1, condition 2, condition 3 does, it's going to report, oh, the prosocial boost condition, the prosocial blocked condition, the personal condition, which again makes sense to our human minds. All right, and then once we have all that set up, we're going to go here to analyze, and we're going to go to compare means and proportions, and we're going to go down here to one-way ANOVA. So SPSS trying to win us back, being very friendly with the labeling of the test. We click on that, and then you can see here, just again, why we have to use this third column here. Notice that the condition variable isn't even an option. It's not even there. We can't even select it. But our factor, we'll start off with the factor because that's easier to explain. Factor is where you have your conditions numbered. It's where you're telling SPSS which person is in which condition. So for that, it's going to be the condit N. So that goes into factor. And then subjective well-being, that is the dependent variable. So the question is causing the subjective well-being. So that's the dependent variable. So we're going to put that in the dependent list. And then effect size, estimate effect size for overall test, that is clicked by default. We're going to leave it there, even though we're not going to do too much with it. Just want to show you that you can get effect sizes for ANOVAs. And then over here, last time we just kind of went through a few of these. We showed you contrast, and we are not going to do any weird contrast or anything like that for this analysis. And we showed you options. You definitely want descriptives on there. Again, just to double check that we did our data entry correct. I wouldn't click on anything else unless you really need that for your analysis, because we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. And then we're going to hit continue. But now, importantly, we're going to go to post-hoc. And in post-hoc here, this is where you find those post-hoc, fancy word for the follow-up analyses. So you can see that we have things here like, well, here are all the analyses where equal variances are assumed. And this is where you're going to find Bonferroni. So we got Bonferroni right there. If we wanted to run a Bonferroni follow-up analysis, we would click this box. We got SIDAK right there. We got Scheffé right there. We got Tukey. This is Tukey HSD, honestly significant difference. We can click that one right there. This is the Fisher's least significant difference. It's just called LSD, which is kind of what I think SPSS was on today. But anyways, so we can click on that. And then also notice down here, equal variance is not assumed. We have the Games-Howell that we mentioned. And then we mentioned 6 post-hoc tests, and we're not even like halfway through what you can do. So there are post-hoc analyses for just about every single ANOVA situation that you can find yourself in. So when I first went through this, I thought to myself, yeah, let's choose them all. Let's show you what all of them can do. And that was a bad idea. I didn't follow my own advice. Always kind of plan the things that you want to do. Otherwise, you'll end up with like a 14-page output that's incredibly difficult to read. So what I want to do today is I want to do the Fisher's least significant difference, because that is the one that the textbook introduced. But we're not going to do Bonferroni. We're not going to do SIDAK. We're not going to do Scheffé. We're not going to do Games-Howell down here. But we are going to keep Tukey, because I do want to show you that the choice of your follow-up analysis actually does matter. So we're going to do the follow-up analysis here, and we're going to choose the Fisher least significant difference, just called LSD, and we're going to choose the Tukey honestly significant difference, just called Tukey. And now that I say that out loud, why didn't they call this Fisher and this Tukey, or this LSD and this HSD? SPSS is just, it's quirky sometimes. All right, so we got LSD clicked, we got Tukey clicked, we hit continue, and now we're ready to hit OK. And it runs our analysis, and it's doing that weird thing that SPSS sometimes does, and I don't know exactly why it's been doing this, but it has been doing this. So I will just explain for a moment, and then we're going to move on just because of time constraints. And this is another reason why run your descriptives. Double check what it is that you're doing. So you'll notice over here, if I go back to the Excel sheet, you'll notice over here that these scores these are hypothetical scores, and they have a lot of decimals so that we can match the data that Aknin et al. Would have analyzed. So again, this is what we've been doing throughout the semester. We're using hypothetical scores to reproduce the statistics that they've actually been doing. For some reason, in the last week only, I don't know what has been going on, SPSS has not been carrying decimals in its copy and paste here. So if I go here to variable view and I go to the decimals and I increase it, for example, to 5, you don't need to do this. Notice that it's lost all the decimals. Now, when I ran this at home, it did the exact same thing. And I was really hoping it was just my computer. And I had to clear this out and try it again, and it did it again. And then I had to clear it out again, and I tried it one more time, and then it didn't do it. One last time, this is the last time that we're going to encounter this, check your descriptives. Because as soon as I saw this, and I saw this mean of 0.2233, I was thinking to myself, that's not the mean that we're supposed to have. And as soon as I saw this, Prosocial blocked has a mean of minus 1.617, that is not the mean that we were supposed to have. So literally, as soon as I saw these descriptives, I knew SPSS did something incorrect. So hopefully yours worked out. Mine didn't work out this time around, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to try to figure out exactly what's going on here. You know what? In the interest of time, let me just try it one time. All right, analyze, compare means, one way ANOVA. Everything else is already good. We hit OK. All right. Well, those are the actual correct numbers. So I guess in this case, sometimes it's SPSS, sometimes it's Excel. The big takeaway, and I couldn't have planned this any better, the big takeaway is check your descriptives. They will save you. They saved us right now. But we've done the analysis correctly. We used the correct steps. We chose the correct follow-up analysis. So let's not stand on any ceremony anymore, and we will get to the results. So these are the results that you hopefully have. These are the results that we eventually got to. These are the results that we're going to be analyzing. So, as I mentioned, check your descriptives. Make sure that for prosocial boost, for the subjective well-being, prosocial boost, we got the right number, we got the right mean, we got the right standard deviation. We can test that in Excel and then double check it against SPSS. Make sure the same thing for prosocial blocked. Make sure the same thing for personal, that those means match up and that the numbers match up. And then again, that we have the total number of subjects we're supposed to have, 181 subjects. We checked our descriptives. Descriptives look good, so we can go on with our analysis. Oh, and also the descriptives kind of give you an insight into the story that you might expect in your follow-up analyses. Because you can see here, prosocial boost has a positive mean subjective well-being score. Prosocial blocked and personal both have negative subjective well-being scores, and they're kind of close together. So maybe we're going to find that prosocial boost is very different, but prosocial blocked and personal, not so different. But that's what we're going to be looking for in the follow-up analysis. We have here the ANOVA. This is the gatekeeper. This is what needs to be significant before we do a post-hoc analysis. So once again, for subjective well-being, we have our between groups. How much variability is there between the conditions? And that is going to be a factor of the variability between the conditions as well as variability from the subjects themselves. However, the within groups variability, that is just the variability of the subjects themselves. You compare one to the other, you get your F statistic. We have an F statistic of 4.105, and that will give you a significance or a p-value of 0.018. So 1.8% of the time, if there was no difference between the prosocial boost, prosocial blocked, and personal populations, if the null hypothesis was true, we would get an F statistic that extreme or more extreme only 1.8% of the time. So we are looking at a situation that would occur in the null hypothesis world only 1.8% of the time. That is way below the 5% risk that we're willing to take. So in this case, we would reject the null hypothesis and we would accept the research hypothesis. At least one of those populations is different from the other. And just as a real quick, we also have our effect sizes down here. Typically, you're going to see partial eta squared be the one that is reported. So that is where you can find it if you need to find it. All right, so we have our F statistic. We have our significant result. We reject the null hypothesis. And just to kind of wrap up this part of the analysis from Aknin et al., using this measure, we conducted a one-way ANOVA comparing the well-being of participants. The overall analysis revealed a significant effect. F2, 178 equals 4.18. That 4.18, that is your F statistic. The 2, that is your between groups degrees of freedom. The 178, that is your within groups degrees of freedom. You have to report both of those because the shape of your F curve, your F statistic curve, changes with both of those degrees of freedom. And then the p-value is less than 0.02. We found 0.018, basically the same story. So we reject the null hypothesis, we accept the research hypothesis, and we know that at least one mean is different. So now we know that something happened. Now we know in the detective analysis that a crime has been committed. Now we do the investigation to figure out which of these stories is the actual true stories. Because we know that at least one of those stories is true, but we don't know which one. So now we're going to find out how to do that. All right, so this is what your output looks like if you choose all 6 of the follow-up analyses that we were mentioning. And it's not even all 6 of them. You can see that we only have like 5. There's still one underneath it. So we did a slightly simplified version of this because I did want to show you the difference between the Tukey honestly significant difference test and the Fisher's least significance difference test. So first thing, make sure that you're looking at the post-hoc test. This will be below the effect sizes. It'll be right at the bottom of your analysis. And then we are going to start off with the least significant difference. So that might be either your top test or your bottom test. Importantly, though, SPSS will label it and let you know, hey, this is the Fisher least significant difference table. So the most challenging part of the follow-up analyses is learning how to read this table and making sense of the table. Because the table is big, the table is intimidating, there's a lot of columns, there's a lot of rows. It's really quite straightforward once you kind of become familiar with it. So let's start that process. This first column here, that is the first condition that is going to be compared. So we have 3 conditions. So this is the column where SPS says, okay, we're going to compare this particular condition. And then this next column is the condition that it's getting compared to. So it's making pairwise comparisons. It's comparing condition 1 to condition 2, condition 2 to condition 3, and these 2 columns are where it tells you which conditions it's comparing. This next column over here, this is the mean difference, and this is simply the mean, the sample mean for one condition minus the sample mean for the other condition. And it gives you that mean difference. But importantly, for our purposes, this column over here gives you the significance. So it's not exactly correct to say that this is like a whole bunch of t-tests, but you can interpret them much the same way that you would just interpret a whole bunch of t-tests. So we take a look at that significance, and basically if the significance is below our alpha level, we know that the two conditions are different from each other, the two populations are different from each other. If that significance level is above our alpha level, we conclude that there's no evidence that the two conditions or populations are different from each other. All right, so let's see that in practice. We'll take a look at that first row. First column is prosocial boost. So what SPSS is telling you, it's saying, hey, I'm going to compare the scores in the prosocial boost condition, and I'm going to compare them to prosocial blocked. So first column there tells you which is the first condition being compared, second column, which is the second condition being compared. So this row is going to compare prosocial boost to prosocial blocked. SPSS lets you know that the first condition, prosocial boost, that's going to be labeled with an I. The second condition, prosocial blocked, that is labeled with a J. That's why you see I condition and J condition. And then when we get to our mean difference over here, SPSS very nicely reminds you that this is actually I minus J. So I minus J, prosocial boost minus prosocial block, you can see that it's a positive number here for the subjective well-being dependent variable, which means that the prosocial boost scores were higher than the prosocial block scores. Okay, so you can see here that there's a lot of information. SPSS is already giving you, oh, I'm doing I and J, and this is I minus J. Imagine how much harder this would be if we did not rename prosocial boost from condition 1 and condition 2 and condition 3. This would be like 1 versus 2, 1 versus 3, I versus J. Your human mind's not made for it. So label your information. But importantly, we have prosocial boost compared to prosocial blocked. The mean difference is 0.39, so prosocial boost is higher, and our significance is 0.01. That is your p-value. You compare that to alpha, and you basically say, this is lower than alpha. So we are going to reject the null hypothesis. We're going to accept this part of the alternative hypothesis, and the prosocial boost population is higher than the prosocial blocked population. So again, it works just like a series of significance tests, and that significance there is your p-value. And then very nicely, almost as if to make up for some of the not so nice things that SPSS has done, if you look at the bottom of your table, it'll actually have a little asterisk that says, oh, the mean difference is significant at the 0.05 level. So if you take a look at mean difference here, it's got that little asterisk here. So it's actually telling you, even before you get to this significance, this p-value here, that the difference is significant at the 0.05 level. So I like to use this as a backup check, just to make sure that, hey, I think it's significant at the 0.05 level. I think we should reject the null hypothesis. Oh, there's an asterisk. SPSS also thinks we should reject the hypothesis. Thank you for your second opinion, SPSS. All right, so what did we learn? Using the Fisher least significant difference, we got one piece of the puzzle. And we know that the population, the prosocial boost population, is higher than or does not equal the prosocial blocked population. We could actually have put in the little greater than symbol there. Prosocial boost population has higher happiness than the prosocial blocked population. So 1/3 of this story is now been told. Okay, now we go on to row number 2. And row number 2, for some reason, has this little blank space there. And this is, I believe, probably a holdout from the 90s when SPSS was first developed, just to kind of save computing power, because what that space there is exactly what's above it. It just didn't want to rewrite it. So that space is actually prosocial boost. So when you're interpreting these tables, don't get confused with the space. The space is just whatever is directly above it. In this case, we are now comparing prosocial boost. And now we're comparing prosocial boost to personal. So prosocial boost versus personal, there's your mean difference. Once again, indicating that prosocial boost scored higher than personal. There's your significance level. Your p-value is 0.02. That is less than 0.05. what that is saying is that this mean difference here between the two groups, if there was no difference between their populations, a mean difference that big would only happen 2% of the time. And we say to ourselves, that is way too unlikely. So we are going to say there probably is a mean difference between those populations. So we have our second piece of the puzzle, and we can see that the mean for the prosocial boost is actually greater than the mean for the personal population. And I apologize, I should have greater than or less than there, but the picture remains the same. The mean for the prosocial boost does not equal because it's greater than the mean for the personal population. So now we got 2/3 of our picture down. Okay, and then we go to the third row here. And in the third row, we find prosocial blocked. And now prosocial blocked is going to be compared. What is SPSS going to compare it to? It's going to compare it to prosocial boost. And if you're thinking about this critically, you might say to yourself, well, wait a second, prosocial blocked compared to prosocial boost, didn't we already do that? And the answer is yes. So this table is about twice as big as it really needs to be. It's redundant. So this is like saying, hey, is prosocial boost higher than prosocial blocked? And SPSS says yes. And then you ask, hey, is prosocial boost smaller than, is prosocial blocked smaller than prosocial boost? And if you ask that, somebody would look at you weird and say, yeah, you just asked that question. So don't get confused about this. You can see here that the mean difference, prosocial boost is 0.39 higher in subjective well-being than prosocial blocked, but prosocial blocked is 0.39 lower than prosocial boost in subjective well-being. It's the same story, it's double lines, and you can see that the significance difference is exactly the same. So when you're doing this table, rather than kind of going row by row by row by row, it's best to decide what your comparisons are that you want to look for, and then you can just go to those particular rows. So we are going to say, well, what we're really interested in is we're interested in prosocial blocked versus personal, because that's the only comparison that's left. If we go down to that fourth row, you see it's blank, but we know that it's whatever is above it in that table, so that's prosocial blocked. And now this is being compared to personal, and the mean difference in subjective well-being is only 0.04. And you can notice there's no asterisks on this particular mean difference. And when we go over to the significance column, we can see that the probability, the p-value is 0.789. So if the null hypothesis is actually true, if there really is no difference between the prosocial blocked population and the personal population, we would find a difference this big 79% of the time. And we say to ourselves, well, that's very common. That's very likely. We probably live in the universe where prosocial blocked and personal are exactly the same. So we fail to reject the null fail to reject the null hypothesis. I did it myself. We accept the null hypothesis. We reject the research hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis. And we come up with our complete picture that prosocial blocked equals personal. So the subjective well-being, average subjective well-being in the prosocial blocked population is the same as the personal population. And there is your complete story now. So if we take a look at Aknin's study, they again reported the ANOVA. It was significant, F statistic 4.18, probability less than 0.02. And then they did a follow-up analysis and they said, oh, hey, Fisher's least significant difference contrast revealed that participants in the prosocial boost condition reported higher subjective well-being than participants in the other two conditions, while subjective well-being levels in the personal and prosocial blocked conditions did not differ. So that is the sentence way of saying this over here. And now we have our complete story in terms of what is going on. All right, any questions about that? Okay, so I mentioned that we wanted to do Fisher's least significant difference and Tukey's honest significant difference because they actually tell two different stories, and I just wanted to show this so that you know why these different follow-up analyses exist. So in this case, we're going to take a look at the post-hoc test. We're going back to the table, but now we're going to go to the Tukey honestly significant difference portion of that table. So that will probably it'll either be the top table or the bottom sub-table in this multiple comparisons. Very nicely, SPSS will label it for you. So look for that Tukey honestly significant difference label right there. And we can just go through this analysis here. So prosocial boost compared to prosocial blocked. There's your mean difference. Notice the mean difference didn't change because for each of these follow-up analyses, the mean difference is just the sample mean for prosocial boost minus the sample mean for prosocial blocked. However, the significance value here is a little bit different, but importantly, it's still less than our alpha. It's still less than our alpha of 0.05. So in this case, we reject the null hypothesis that these two populations are the same, and we can conclude that the prosocial boost population actually has higher subjective well-being. So we can conclude that the prosocial boost population is greater than the prosocial blocked population subjective well-being. All right, so now we go to row number 2. And what is that value right there? Well, that is prosocial boost, we mentioned before. So now we got prosocial boost compared to personal, and we have a mean difference, exact same mean difference of 0.35, but now we have a significance level of 0.052. And this is close to our alpha level. This is close to that alpha level of 0.05. But this is a nice example of some of the frustration that happens when you're a researcher, because sometimes you're looking for those significant p-values. Those are the big results. Those are the ones that are the most interesting and make the biggest contributions. And sometimes you're just super far away from your p-value, like we saw with that 78%. Sometimes you're so close. We're so close here, 5.2%. We reject that 5%, right? 5% is our cutoff. So we're very, very close. But importantly, we're over. We got to stick to the rules. This isn't horseshoes and hand grenades, right? This is, we have to have that line in the sand. And if your result comes up to the line in the sand but doesn't cross it, it's the same conclusion as if it was a mile away. So in this case, 0.052, 5.2%, greater than our alpha level of 0.05. So we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We reject the research hypothesis. We accept the null hypothesis. And we say that there is no difference between the populations of the prosocial boost and the personal population. And then finally, we go down to our fourth row here. We got prosocial blocked. We got personal, same mean difference as we saw in the Fisher LSD. Significance is about as close to 1 as you can get. So 96% of the time, we would get a result this extreme or more extreme. So we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We reject the research hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis, and we conclude that the happiness of the prosocial blocked condition equals the happiness of the personal condition. So notice that we did 2 follow-up analyses, and we have 2 different stories. We have the Fisher least significant difference story, where prosocial boost is greater than the personal condition. We have the Tukey, where prosocial boost is equal to the personal condition. So if we were going to sum this up in a single kind of take-home message, the Fisher least significance difference follow-up analysis basically says it's better to give meaningful than to receive, right? So you're going to feel better if you give a meaningful gift than if you buy yourself something. It's better to give meaningful than to receive. The Tukey honestly significance test, on the other hand, says that the real story is 'tis better to give meaningful than to give non-meaningful, and 'tis just as good to give meaningful as to receive, right? So 2 very different stories based on which follow-up test did you do. So the question becomes, did Aknin et al. Use an appropriate follow-up analysis? Because remember, when we were going over the strengths and weaknesses, we mentioned that the Fisher least significant difference was the most powerful, but it was also the most liberal, right? And that Tukey was that nice balance between power and being powerful and being conservative. So was this an appropriate follow-up analysis? or should they have used the Tukey honestly significant difference? And when you consider the entire rationale of the analysis, it was an appropriate follow-up. It was well, I don't want to say that it was the correct follow-up to use, because saying that one follow-up is the correct one to use is just not something that we can do. But it is an appropriate follow-up to use. It's defensible, it's logical, and it makes sense. So the reasons for this is that the ANOVA had only 3 groups, which makes the Fisher's least significant difference very acceptable. It is very powerful and really at its best or at its most safe when you only have 3 different groups. It is appropriate when the overall ANOVA was significant. So this wasn't a fishing expedition where they were like, hey, let's just run some post-hoc tests, even though the ANOVA wasn't significant. And then they also had these planned comparisons that they want to do. And the sample sizes were equal across the different conditions. And the last one is that the authors were studying small to medium psychological effects, and these were subtle effects. And importantly, they're not dangerous effects. So in a study like this, where you are trying to figure out how the human mind works and how different psychological effects might occur, this is the kind of study where you can be a little bit more powerful and a little less conservative. You can be more powerful and more liberal, which is the Fisher least significance difference test. Add on top of that there's only 3 conditions, and it was a very appropriate test to use. Notice that when we took a look at the Tukey honesty significance difference test, we'll go back up here to the comparison between the two. The Fisher least significance test detected a difference between prosocial boost and personal. The Tukey did not. It did not detect that difference between prosocial boost and personal. So again, you can see here, Fisher least significant difference, more powerful, detected a difference. Tukey's honestly significant difference, less powerful, did not detect that difference between prosocial boost and personal. On the other hand, it might be the case that prosocial boost and personal are really the same, in which case Fisher's least significance difference was a little too liberal, and Tukey's honestly significant difference was more conservative. So it's impossible to say which one they should have used, but it is instructive to take a look at the differences between the two, and that the two of them actually did give different stories. And again, how a researcher might go about making this decision. So Aknin et al. Were probably sitting down thinking about what statistics should we do, which analysis should we use, and they said to themselves, look, we got 3 conditions, we have very equal sample sizes, and we have an effect. It's not a drug test. It's not going to be harmful to anybody if we get this a little bit wrong, if we overstate our claim. So let's go with a test where we're most likely to find a difference if it exists, and we'll just accept the fact that it might be a little bit more liberal. So we're going to do the Fisher's least significant difference test. All right, so that is the story of Making a Difference Matters and the ANOVAs and follow-up ANOVAs. Any final questions before we wrap this up? All right, so that was the final significance test of this course. So next week, we are going to be basically doing student choice review. So if you haven't already, go into Canvas. There's a survey there where you can let me know what is it that you might want to see. If it's something that is in that little drop-down menu, just click on that. And if it's something that is not suggested, put that into the second question, which is an essay comment. And I will do my best to cover anything that people feel that they need a second look at, need a deeper dive on, or just need to see it again, maybe in a different context. But the more you let me know what you want to see, the more I'll be able to kind of hit those and fill those needs. But so make sure you answer that survey. But other than that, we're done for today.